Good morning. Welcome back. And today's Parshas Saitsai, which you could find on page 1046. Now, before we begin analyzing this Parsha itself, we are going to give a brief look at this book, the book of Devarim. There's a uniqueness, there's something different here that we are accustomed to looking at the first four books of the Torah in one way. And then tradition teaches us that we are to look at this last book in a different way, different style. And now the rabbis add that when it comes to the first four books, it's recorded by Moshe, but these are the words of the Almighty. So you cannot analyze Moshe at all by looking at the text, because he is just sharing, repeating, recording what he heard from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On the other hand, when it comes to the book of Devarim, we are dealing here with Moshe Rabbeinu acting more like a prophet, like a traditional prophet, where the ideas he sees, and he sees it with great clarity. He knows very well the will of God, but then he records it with his own words. So there's a significant difference there. And it's logical because this is a book that is addressing a nation as they are preparing to enter into the land of Israel. You have to locate the book. In other words, where is this message? You look in the beginning of the book and we are told this is a nation that's on the east bank of the Jordan River. Everyone talks about the west bank. I think we should talk about the east bank of the Jordan River. And the nation is there and they are semi-settled already. Some of them already inherited land. They are interacting with other people as well. They're no longer a nation in the wilderness. So therefore there is a need for a more traditional prophet who is to guide them how to keep their old traditions. So these words are, we can compare them more to the traditional prophet than the first four books of the Torah. So there is a difference there. Now there are going to be other differences as well when we talk about the Haftarah. So we always know that our mission is, when we read the Haftarah, if we are there and if we are listening, that we want to find a connection to the weekly portion. That works well for the first four books of the Torah. Parshas, in Chumash Devarim, you could try it, but you're not going to succeed because there is a very different agenda there when it comes to the Haftarot. What's the agenda in the book of Devarim? The book of Devarim, what's the agenda of the Haftarah? Now, I'm saying that Moshe Rabbeinu already is serving like a prophet. So first of all, Shabbat, the first Haftarah in the book of Devarim is Chazon. What's the theme? And then for 7 weeks we have the process of Nachamu, of the Shiva de Nachamta, 7 Haftarot that are giving comfort to the people of Israel. And then after those 7, we are already in the high holiday spirit. So we already are in the Yamim Noraim. So we don't really have Haftarot that relate to the Parashah. There's a difference there as well. The next difference is going to relate to the following, but now let's turn to some text on page 1048. But you're going to have your hand at the same time as you are on page 1048, the last word. You're going to have to go ahead and assist me in comparing the words, the verse that we are going to look at here, to a very, very similar verse as it appears in the book of Shemot. And then we're going to go ahead and list the differences. And the theme is similar. So again, you are on page 1048, which is Perek Chavbet Pasuk Dalet. And at the same time, you're going to go ahead and open Perek Chav Gimel of Shemot with a different hand. Page 434. 434. Again, the last word on page 432 actually, but just 434 will be fine, and you'll trust me with one word, not more. So let's start with our parsha, okay? Let's start with page 1050. Lo tireh. You shall not see. Et chamor achicha, the donkey of your brother, or shoro, or their ox, noflim baderech, when they are falling on the road. Why do animals fall?
Too heavy a burden.
Too heavy a burden, right? If it's a political candidate, it's because of heat stroke or something, or pneumonia. But if an animal, it is because of the load, the overwhelming load on the animal. So you should not stand by. Don't just observe it, but rather participate here. So do not vehitalamta mehem. Do not ignore, but rather, what are you supposed to do? Hakem takim imo. You should assist, surely stand them up. Assist in the hakama, in the standing of the animal. Fine? Valid lesson, very true. This fits into the theme of Devarim. You're entering into a land, you're going to be interacting with people, you have to be a decent person, and a decent person does not ignore the plight of another person, and in this case also another animal. Fine. Look at Chumash Shemot, Perek Chav Gimel, Pasuk Hey Ki Tireh Chamor. Again, seeing here the same donkey. It's a donkey, but it's a chamor of sonacha, someone that you hate. Someone that you hate. No need to think of anyone specific. Chamor sonacha. And here he is rovetz tachat masao. And here he is crouching under the burden, meaning it's not that the burden fell off and you have to assist him in returning the load, but rather the load is simply overwhelming the animal. So the Torah asks, "V'chadalta mazov lo." Do you think that it's proper to refrain from helping him? Come on, it's not the Jewish way of doing things. Azov ta'azov imo, help him, but it's imo with him. And we are told that the owner has no right to say, "Oh, you have a mitzvah to help me," right? It's an opportunity for you to do chesed. That's wonderful. So I'm going to sit back and relax, and you do your chesed, and bravo, bravo. You know, you're getting your. We don't do that, but rather there's an expectation that the owner participates as well. That the owner participates, and if the owner believes that others have the responsibility of taking care of his load and him not, you don't have to help him. One of the commentators, the Kli Yakar, notes that this is a message in tzedakah, right? Not commenting on anyone specific, but that you have a responsibility to help those who help themselves. If they say, you know what, this is an opportunity for you to do tzedakah, will I relax? Azov ta'azov imo. Fine. Very important message. It's time to start comparing them. So I mentioned the fact that one of them seems to, the first one in Shemot, seems to be talking about the load on the animal, while in Devarim, the later one, is talking about a load that needs to be adjusted onto the animal. But what's the significant difference? Achicha, Sonacha. Earlier on in Parashat Mishpatim, in Shemot, we're dealing here with the person you hate. While as time moves on, he's your brother, which was a beautiful, happy ending here. But there obviously must be a message there, right? How do we understand that? So now, listen to this rabbinic reading of your sonacha, of the person that you hate. So again, this is the rabbis, it's in the Talmud and Pesachim, reading into this verse that appears in Shemot. And the Talmud wonders, wait a second, you think that the text is talking about someone you happen to hate. But the Talmud claims that that's not possible, because Judaism would not go ahead and label someone with a label that should not be placed upon them. You're not supposed to be hating people. It's not appropriate. Would the Torah tell you that you meet someone who you just punched, as a matter of fact, you shouldn't be punching people? You shouldn't be hating people. So the Talmud has difficulty with taking this word, sonacha, the person that you hate. Literally, how do we understand it? So the Talmud shares the following, that it must be talking about a situation where you yourself, notice that this is a person that does not value tradition that is accepted. Example would be, you, on Yom Kippur, you know this individual, he's a healthy person, and then at some point during Yom Kippur morning, and again we're talking about a healthy person who could fast, you see him sitting in a corner in shul where no one's looking, and of course you chapped him, you saw him eating his snacks. Let's make it more exciting already. His what do they call the Big Mac? Eating his Big Mac on Yom Kippur. Okay, in shul, but no one was looking. You chapped him. So now there's danger there, by the way, because if you just say, "Oh, that's fine," to yourself, it's going to have a negative impact on you. So therefore, the Talmud tells us that actually you're supposed to develop a hatred to such a person. There's supposed to be hatred within you. Perhaps not so much to the person, but to the actions. But there has to be within you something that labels such behavior as unacceptable. Because if we just have this attitude that everything's okay, it's not good for us. Fine? That's how the Talmud understands that you could have a sonacha. Nevertheless, if you look back at this verse now, with the understanding that we're dealing with a problematic individual, nevertheless, even though he is someone that is technically your sonacha, someone that there's hatred, nevertheless, when you see such a person with a challenge, with difficulty, you see the fact that his animal is burdened with the load, what are you supposed to do? Azov ta'azov imo. Help him. Okay, you should go ahead and help him. Why? In other words, if you just labeled him someone that's quote-unquote a sinner, why help him? So the Tosafot, so this is a French insight from the 12th century, shares with us the following, that if you have proper hatred, contained hatred, not towards the person, but towards the actions, but then you don't do acts of kindness towards him, what's going to happen? He's going to hate you, and he's going to hate you beyond just actions, but as a person. He hates you. What's the result? You're going to hate him. Judaism does not want that feeling, that the contained feeling of disdain for actions to go overboard. It has to be controlled. Do acts of kindness, even to that person who is quote-unquote someone who you could be a soneh towards him. Interesting insight? Fine. Now, with it, you can understand as well, perhaps, you all know that Rav Kook, you've heard of Rav Kook, and Rav Kook had the ability to interact with everyone. This is the beginning of the 20th century in Eretz Yisrael, and many of those people were ones that were knowledgeable in Jewish faith and abandoned Jewish faith. Individuals that the traditional community would believe that these are people you should not interact with at all because they are Reshaim. And Rav Kook would respond that you should know. When they wrote him and they questioned him, how are you so confident in your interactions that you're not going to be impacted by them? And his response was, you should know, when I have a relationship with them, it's only with them, not with their actions. I have the ability to separate people from actions. So therefore, as I show my love towards them, I love them. They're my fellow Jew. In no way do I show one iota of love towards their lifestyle or towards their values. If you have that ability, then interact with people. This is what Rav Kook said, and is found with people like you've heard of Rabbi Aryeh Levi, who had that ability to deeply love people, and at the same time have the strength of separating from their actions and not being impacted at all. Beautiful. So when you interact with the quote-unquote the soneh, you have to have that strength, that ability to be ozev, as if to let go of the actions. Because when you interact with people, the reality is right? If I go ahead, and we're all impacted by people that go ahead and eat at a specific restaurant, kosher, whatever it is. I too, if I'm going to be interacting with them and schmoozing with them, I'm going to develop a desire to do what they do. To be one who could interact with the person and yet let go of specific details and aspects of their life, their strength. You have to have the ability to be an ozev, to let go. That's why the word, looking back at Shemot, it is ozov. Now, so far so good. We understand Parshat Mishpatim. So if we would be learning about Parshat Mishpatim, would we have already our Dvar Torah and we could close the class? Yes.
Can that not be interpreted like a real enemy, like let's say Hamas?
Okay, so the Talmud asked that question.
That's why they help them in the hospitals?
Oh, interesting.
Interesting. Cannot that be interpreted that way?
It could. The Talmud makes it clear. Soneh she'amru, or this whole verse relates specifically to an Israel. The rabbis make it clear because they want to prevent the Haaretz crowd from going overboard with their love that we're terrible and they're great. Very dangerous that we Jews are very good in doing it for some reason throughout history, but that's a good point. But now let's move on, while you could still keep an eye on this verse, to this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha, for some reason, it's Lo Tiret Chamor, and I think we would have been fine with the fact that we are talking about the Sonecha, but in this week's portion, on page 1050, the text decides, let's drop the Sonecha and let's move up to Achicha, your brother, for some reason. So we have to ask, why? Fair question. So now, in the Chumash, you want to build an altar, you're inspired, you want to bring something to God, you're in biblical times, you want to go ahead and burn something to honor the Almighty. We're okay with it not being done today, but in the past it was done. So what were the two options in biblical times for the type of structure, device, you would build in your backyard to bring a korban? What would you build in your backyard to bring a korban? Mizbeach. What other options existed in the region? Close, but it was called a matzeva. By Avraham Avinu, we find him burning things on matzeva, and archaeologists have found many matzevot, less mizbachot. Why?
What was the difference?
What is the difference? So the difference is that a matzeva was made with one stone. One big stone, you put it in your backyard, you burn what you want to burn, mission accomplished. The mizbeach, on the other hand, the mizbeach was made with smaller stones. Mizbeach avanim ta'aseh. You make it with many different stones. That's the practical difference. So far, so good. Now, why is it that archaeologists found more matzevot than mizbechot? Because the mizbeach breaks. Easy to break. The matzeva is a little bit harder, it's one stone. Now, in the days of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, they were offering things on their matzevot. But then, when the Torah was given, at some point, God says, you know what? I disapprove of the matzeva. From now on, only mizbeach. Very interesting. It was okay for Avraham. It was okay for Yitzchak. It was okay for Yaakov. But now, with the people of Israel as a nation, no longer good. That's what we're told. Why is it? So there's a traditional approach. And the traditional approach is that, listen, in the days of Avraham Avinu, there was one way to serve God. You had a teacher. His name was Avraham. He taught you that you're supposed to do acts of kindness. That was the approach, and that was the way for a good person to serve and to connect to God. In the days of Yitzchak, there's one person. But when we turn into a nation, there's diversity. Anyone who believes that there's only one way to be spiritual is a problematic individual. Anyone who believes that my way is good, anyone that's to the right is meshugah, is too frum, anyone to the left is not frum enough, there's a problem there. The one who believes that there's only one stone, one way to do it, that's a rejected Judaism. You have to understand that God Almighty wants diversity. He wants the many stones to create the altar. Synagogues, when built, if possible, not always doable, they try to have 12 windows in the front. The idea of the 12 windows is that a Jew has to understand that there are 12 paths to reach God. There are different ways to reach Him. Don't think there's only one way, right? Don't turn into a Shammai, be a Hillel, who understands that there are many different, yes?
At the same time, when Yaakov was on his way to Lavan, he took a few stones to sleep, and in the morning there were one stone to show unity.
Exactly. Well, it did turn into one stone, and it shows us that in the Bet HaMikdash, which was that location, that is where everything comes together. Because Elanu, right, Ela, Abechad B'Shem, we have one Father in heaven, so that's how we all come together. That is a correct statement, that we do unify. But we unify by taking, what do we put there? Different stones. This is the idea. So here we go. Mizbeach is desirable to God Almighty because it has many stones. That's the traditional approach. But then there's a different approach, and that is, throughout our history, we have failed when we have not adjusted our Judaism within the Judaism, meaning emphasizing different aspects that are all true. God forbid we are changing anything. But there has to be mid-course adjustments of our tradition. Someone who takes policies from the 1820s and applies them to the 1880s will fail. A school that does not understand that times have changed is going to be a failing school. Okay? Our goal is, of course, that we have Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim. Torah stands. But how to be sure that the next generation is inspired, you have to have a wise leader that's not a fundamentalist, not one that believes that we can do everything as we have been doing in Poland and in Ukraine and in Hungary in the 18th century. There has to be an understanding of the new realities that exist. That's what Judaism is about. Okay? You cannot take high levels of the past to create and to use as a template to guide for the future. You know that when my father passed away, we inherited. I inherited because I took most of them, but we inherited a lot of books, a lot of sfarm. Now, some of them belong to my father, some belong to my grandfather, and some belong to my great-grandfather. And this great-grandfather was my father's mother's father, who was a Rabbi Koloditsky, his name was, and I have some svarim here that still remain. As I was going through the books, I realized that some of them are really falling apart. It's very nice to have a Rambam that was used by my great-grandfather, but when one book of Rambam turns into 270 pages because the binding is so old and the pages are yellow, I'm not going to go ahead and save it forever. So I had no choice. I had to put some of them in Shemus. But I found written on the back of one of these texts, some words recorded most probably by my great-grandfather. It is possible that it was by my great-grandmother. Okay, and I think the color indicates that it's old. Right? So here we go. What are these words about? So,
Shopping list.
No, it was not. Please don't forget, the chalas and sobis was not the list. No, thank you. So now, the words are, I'll show it to you afterwards. Be'ezrat Hashem itbarach, kibalnu bli neder. In other words, the parents accepted, without a vow, the following. Lehadrich, to go ahead and guide. Et b'neinu, our son. Now, this son, what was his Hebrew name? Shraga Feivel was his name, if I remember. Shraga. Okay, it's just they just write a shin there for it. They don't give us the full name, but it was Shraga Feivel. So here we go. The parents accepted upon themselves to guide their child. Rak leTorah v'yirat shamayim. That his whole life, what will it be? A life of Torah and the fear of God. Velo lilmodlo shum davar acher. This son is not going to learn anything else. He's going to be kulo la Hashem. Now this is very inspiring if you read the Tanakh. and you read about Hannah, and you read about the fact that he had a Shmuel, and she saw that the child was a gift from God. These are wonderful and very inspiring words. No doubt in my mind, these are very special people that are doing things for the sake of heaven, and they know that in the beginning of the 20th century there are different paths. This child is going to be doing nothing but studying Torah day and night. And what is he not going to learn? Kmo. What's going to be on the no-do list? Sfa acheret v'kadomeh. And you should know that they're upgrading it here because af limud sfat hakodesh, even the holy language, he's not going to learn it from the works of Bialik, chas v'shalom, but yilmod megmara from the Talmud, umetanach from the Tanakh, velo meshum limud vejargon. Jargon is a language or what? Jargon or dictionary maybe, because it also could be. Okay, pashut yilmod ech lichtov davar. In other words, if he needs to write something, that's it, but nothing more. Now, why, you ask, why specifically this? There were many, many children. Why specifically Shragafaivel? So, Elazar Shragafaivel was his name, now remember. Shahaya Chole. He was an ill child. Lo Aleinu. Ubaruch Hashem Nitrapeh. And somehow, miraculously, he survived. A gift from heaven in those days. No penicillin in Alitus in Lithuania. And we were given the exact date. Or Liyom Hey. It was Wednesday night. Parashat Lech Lecha. Shnat, and the year was Aleph Ayin Taf Reish, which is Taf Reish Ayin Aleph, which means towards the end of 1910. Towards the end of 1910, he survived. So therefore, and they sign it here, and I'm not sure what it is, but there's a complete commitment here of Elazar Shragafaivel, only Torah in Yerushalayim. Beautiful, what parents do. So Elazar Shragafaivel, the one son that was chosen to be the next Gadol Hador, was of course a pilot. He was a pilot for the RAF. Mm-hmm. Right now, but to become a pilot, you cannot manage only with Talmud and Tanakh, just for the record. You need a little bit more knowledge, and my feeling is that unfortunately he was not committed to Judaism. I don't think he kept Torah mitzvahs. I think, even though my grandmother claimed that he did, because my grandmother shared a legend, which is, I'm confident is not true, that before his last flight in 1941, her brother, known at that time as Louis was davening Shmoneh Esrei before he got on his last flight that was shot down by the Nazis in 1941. That's the legend. Now, it's an incredible note, but there's a message there as well. There's a message there as well, because you go ahead and you take a child into the changing world of Lithuania of the beginning of the 20th century, and you go ahead and use... This could have worked very well in Lithuania, by the way, in 1820. This is before the massive impact of the Haskalah. It could have worked in 1720. But in 1920, these things don't work. You have to adjust to new times. That's what Judaism demands for the sake of that Judaism survives. I keep this note in an envelope in my office, right next to a copy of the smicha that another, from my mother's side, a great-grandfather of mine got. And this great-grandfather got a smicha from the Berlin Seminary, where they studied philosophy, and they studied English, and they studied math. And he, on the other hand, Rabbi Shlomo Akon Manes, actually, there's someone with that same name that told me that he's stopping by here today, this great-grandfather, he was a well-educated German Jew, but knew throughout his life, they said that he lost his eyesight towards the end of his life, but he still remembered all of Mishnah and all of Talmud. Right? And he adjusted. Why? There was an understanding in that family that these are new times, that perhaps in the year 1800 you don't send a child to a school that's going to be teaching math, science, and philosophy. But nowadays, in Germany, there is an understanding that that's how you keep things alive. So here we have the adjustments that are made for the survival of Judaism. So now comes the Sforno. So we're dealing here with a 15th century authority, and says the following. You wonder why once upon a time matzeva was good Today it's no longer good. And he says the following. Matseva comes from the word nitzav. Nitzav. What does nitzav mean?
Standing upright.
Standing upright in front of God. To construct or to bring an offering on a matzeva is an indication that you are on a level that you are constantly before God. You are always mindful of God. Anything you do, you are thinking there is a God, this is the world of God, what I am eating, I'm enjoying the world of God. That's a very high spiritual level. The nation of Israel lost the ability of retaining that level with the sin of the golden calf. Before golden calf, before the Chet HaEgel, matzeva, because you could be a nitzav. When the nation falls, there is no longer a matzeva. This is what he notes. And we have to understand that the book of Devarim, things we read in Shemot, and by the way, what we read in Parashat Mishpatim, the first verse, is talking about a nation before the fall. Here, Parashat Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu is guiding a nation that the nation should understand very well. You are not on a nitzav level. You are on a level that's unfortunately lower, but you have to adjust to it. You have to be sure Judaism survives the new reality. With that, I want to return back to the Chamor. What was our question we're dealing with? Chamor Sonacha versus Chamor Achicha. You know, it's interesting when I read the works of great rabbinic, especially Hungarian rabbis from the 1820s and 30s, about how terrible it is to give a drosha on Shabbos in a language that is the vernacular, if it's not Yiddish. In other words, a drosha must be in Yiddish. And they know that if you happen to show up in a shul, and the rabbi who gets up is giving it in the language spoken in the streets and not in Yiddish, you're supposed to get up and leave. Now that explains for me something, that there are times, but you have to get, so I'm reading that, and I wonder, imagine if I start doing that, right? That would be very interesting. You understand, everyone would tell you, anyone normal at least would tell you, times have changed. So this is something, they say that the Chazon Ish, when in Bnei Brak in the 1930s, when they established the cheder there, they asked him, what language should you teach in? And he said, Ivrit. And he was under attack from the old yeshuv in Yerushalayim. You're not allowed to speak Ivrit, only Yiddish. And he again made the same point, that imagine if, a person in a war, right, a person goes through a war, and then 30 years later there's another war, and he goes to the same line where he was 30 years ago. He's a fool. You have to adjust your lines to where the battle is taking place. To go ahead.
He talked about the Yemenites.
The Yemenites, no, listen, that...
so how is the Yemenite going to come to Yeshiva?
How the Yemenites are not going to do well with Yiddish. That is, So you have to realize new realities. You have to adjust to realities. And that's what we're going to do now with our question. Why is it? So our question is, why is it that in Dvarim, Parashat Ki Tetzeh, on page 1050, it is Chamor Achicha. So comes Rabbi Meir Simcha of Dvinsk. What's his name? Rabbi Meir Simcha of Dvinsk. And Rabbi Meir Simcha, I always quote him, because this is a man that truly understands the fact that times change. Don't just take the old, because if you just deal with the old, you are in danger, in grave danger.
When did he live?
He passed away in 1924, 1926. So he shares with us the following. When we read the word sonacha in Parashat Shemot, what kind of soneh was it? Remember the Talmud? What did the Talmud tell us? Why is it a person that is quote-unquote
He did
hated?
something that was against Torah.
It was because of his actions. So he says, you know what? After the sin of the golden calf, when we all stumbled, if a person, if a person analyzes his own actions, he will sense very well that he's not perfect. So therefore, even though there was in the past the concept of someone that you could hate, nowadays, after the fall, there is no such thing anymore. Everyone, that little bit, that contained feeling of the person you hate, and it's contained because you have to be careful, you have to protect yourself, not to see the person eating the sandwich, the McDonald's sandwich on Yom Kippur. You're not allowed, you can't allow it to have that negative impact on you. You have to develop that contained hatred. That has its place before the fall. After the fall, treat everyone, because you're not perfect either. And you cannot even have the contained sonacha. After the fall, everyone, it's chamor achicha. This is what he knows. There's an adjustment. And this is what the book of Dvarim is about. Adjusting to the new reality. There's no longer that room, because no one is perfect. And therefore there's no longer that room for the contained sonacha. A beautiful message, but it's important, the important one of the adjustments, as we prepare, we're in the month of Elul, and we prepare for the Yamim Noraim. So obviously, you have to keep it balanced. There has to be an understanding that it's significant, but there's always that danger that if you study this intense text that starts giving you the picture of the Gehenom that only Dante could do, right? Scare the living daylights out of you, and you freeze, and you can't act, and you're overwhelmed. You're not going to have a successful season. And it's interesting to note that 20th century thinkers, there was someone called Revolbi, which we've quoted in the past, had an understanding that the message today has to be that you have to focus on the good you have. He says a beautiful statement, addressing the Ba'alei Musar, the Musarniks, right, who would sit and analyze their flaws, magnifying their flaws. And he would note that if a person does not appreciate their good aspects, if the person doesn't feel good about the wonderful things they are doing, you have no right to focus at all on the negative you do. Because he had an understanding that in this era, if you're going to go ahead and take a person and talk to them and encourage them to focus on negativity, they're going to self-destroy. What can we achieve if we self-destroy? The focus has to shift due to new realities. And this is what we learn in the book of Dvarim, and this is the message here, a very specific one. Lo tira et chamor achicha. After the fall, treat everyone like enough. A very magnificent message. I just want to share with you one more detail, which I gave in a drasha a few weeks ago, but I'm going to give it anyway. I mentioned that we were in Washington, D.C. You've been there? Mm-hmm. Right? Okay, you've been to Washington. You've been, of course, Washington. So, in Washington, D.C., we had a tour of the Capitol. And in the tour of the Capitol, I took it years ago, and the tour guide was pointing at some columns there that support the dome, the rotunda, and they note that, look at these columns. Touch the columns. And remember, you want to know who built this? Slaves. Okay, it's a fact, there's no question. And then if you listen to a message of Michelle Obama at the Democratic Convention, also she mentions the fact how beautiful it is that my two wonderful, beautiful girls are playing in a house that was built by slaves. True, it's a fact. Then I turn on the radio and they note that Georgetown University found records where they are able to trace specific slaves that were sold by them in the beginning of the 19th century. And they have names. And they're going to be offering special privileges for admission for the descendants of those slaves. Why? They felt we mistreated them. It's time for reparations. That's what we're going to do. And my thought was that's interesting because we are descendants of slaves too. Maybe we should demand, special privileges to Cairo University, right? We should, why not? You're interested? Not so interested. So now, what is interesting about Judaism is that we talk about the fact that we are slaves. But it's always not we were slaves and therefore we deserve. but rather we were slaves, and therefore you be sensitive, ki geraita beretz Mitzrayim. Towards the Egyptians, you know what we are told in this week's Parsha? Lo tita'ev, in other words, don't have hatred towards them because they did host you. You suffered as a slave? Okay, so therefore when you see someone suffering, you have the responsibility of tapping into the emotions and the feelings that you have and recognize what difficulty they are going through. Judaism takes our experience and says, now you have a responsibility due to that experience. Slavery was terrible, so be thankful. Remember the fact and be thankful to God Almighty that you left Egypt. That's what we do. That's the difference. And it's something that's inspiring about our tradition. And it's during this period of time, when we look back, there are things that we shouldn't regret, but rather there are misdeeds that we could turn around and use them for good. We could assist someone that's going through that difficulty and say, you know what? I went through it too and I was able to deal with it. So this is what's quite magnificent about our tradition. Yes, Alan?
There's a danger to that too. That's why we have so many Jews that are, pro-Palestinian and pro-BDS and all that other kind of stuff, because, it's almost like they feel guilty, that we have a little piece of land that we can call our own.
So true.
And they're willing to sacrifice, our own safety and security because of that. So you need a balance.
No question, there's a need for a balance. But I would say that when people take things like the Holocaust and they make it un-Jewish, right? A crime against humanity. I hate when I hear that. What do you mean it's a crime against the Jewish people? When people try to make it universal, the result is going to be, that is true. We have to remember the particular aspects that it was to uproot Jews and Jewish tradition. And you're 100% right that when it's not balanced and it turns into, we are going to be the ones to go ahead and deal with the crimes in Rwanda, if you forget about the Jewishness, you're going to turn into an anti-Israel party. And we see it, unfortunately, where you have people in the United States where their grandparents in the 1950s were proud Zionists, and now you see them marching with Palestinians. This is what happens when you purge the Jewishness from the emotions. But a valid point indeed. Thank you, everyone. And everyone have a wonderful day. See you next week.